Hello YouTube friends. Today on this video I decided to talk about country in Europe, a tiny little country called Switzerland. So why do I want to talk about Switzerland? Well, I'm going to tie that to the gun crime, the violent gun crime in America, in North America, specifically in the United States. So Switzerland has a population of 8.5 million people, famous for their chocolate, little Swiss arms, Swiss knives, Swiss Army knives, and their neutrality. During the Second World War, they were fully neutral. So, what is it that that I want to mention as far as the guns, gun ownership, and crime, firearm-related crime in Switzerland? Out of this population, 8.5 million population, almost every household has multiple guns in Switzerland. So I don't know exact numbers of gun ownership, but it's very high. I know that far at least. I mean, you can go ahead and dig into it and to get the exact numbers, but it's pretty high. I think one number I kind of stuck with me is over 2 or 2.5 million people. That's pretty high when you look at the entire population. I mean, there are obviously babies or kids between the ages 0 and 18, if you think that, and that's a pretty high number. When you look at the Swiss population, 8.5 million people living in a place a little less than twice the size of New Jersey. That's a tiny little country. And their per capita income is about $6,000 to $8,000 annually. So this is per capita income in Switzerland, very wealthy country, and their citizens are pretty comfortable, pretty well off. When you look at the population demographics, there are 3 different languages are spoken in Switzerland. One is German, one is French, and one is Italian. None of those languages are dominant. None of those cultures are dominant. It's almost like very, in a way, kind of fairly distributed amount of population into those 3 different distinct groups or ethnicities. Yet people who live in Switzerland call themselves Swiss. They might acknowledge their ethnic background as like Italian-speaking Swiss or French-speaking Swiss or German-speaking Swiss, but they call themselves Swiss. There is no true minority or majority or dominant ethnicity or dominant this or dominant that. Demographics are kind of even keel. So when you look at the country and knowing that they have that many firearms in their possession, and comparing to gun ownership in the United States, it is inevitable to make comparisons, to make sense of the violent crime, firearm-related crime in North America or in the United States. So, first off, with all this gun ownership in Switzerland, in all practical sense, there is no gun-related crime. If you look at the percentages, there is a percentage. It is 0.02% of gun-related, firearms-related crime, whether it's burglary, some kind of murder, mass shooting, unheard of. So, how does that work? And my question is, actually, what I wanted to, bring it up here to your attention is why is it that when people talk about gun crime, gun laws, anti-gun, for-gun, gun-related, laws, and all the crime that involves firearms. Why is it that we don't hear, or do you remember hearing a lot of conversations like this? Do you remember hearing a lot of comparisons between the U.S. demographics or U.S. Social structure or U.S. gun crime versus Switzerland, Swiss situation? It is it's like, ideal, in fact, beyond ideal almost. It's like unthinkable. That many guns in their possession, and there is no gun crime. There is no mass shootings. You know what I'm saying? There is none of those things that is taking place in this country. Right now, in the wake of Uvalde, Texas, Robb Elementary school shooting, and prior to that, only maybe a couple of weeks prior, Buffalo, New York, grocery store shooting, and unfortunately, most recently, Tulsa, Oklahoma, hospital shooting, where 4 people had been killed by the gunman. You're looking at the time span. We're talking within about the time space of, space of 2 months maybe, and less than that. How many different shootings took place? How many people have been killed? And there is absolutely no comparison. In both countries, one is United States, the other one is Switzerland. Especially compared to their population size, population base, with very high gun ownership, the crime rate is simply not even remotely comparable. Numbers are here. Within the U.S. borders, give and take, about 35,000 people every year are being killed by firearms. That is, people getting killed by firearms. That's a total wholesome number. That includes everything. That includes the number of suicides, number of murders, maybe the domestic, violence, maybe burglary, you name it. All the crime that involves firearms, about 35,000 people annually. That's an amazing number. That's a very high number. Especially if you look at specifically to the mass shootings, mostly school shootings. Since 2012, about 10 years. It will be 10 years end of this year. How many? 2,900 school children have been killed through these mass shootings. The last one has been the Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. Okay, so we gotta sit down and look at this very seriously. Try to understand, to make sense of what is the difference? Why not in Switzerland? Why is it like this here in America? So, obviously this is an extremely complicated, comprehensive social science problem with very strong or very deep public health or mental health aspect in it. There is a lot of work needs to be done to understand the demographic dynamics that is leading these crimes in this country and comparing it to the country like Switzerland. The gun ownership in Switzerland is, I understand, based on my little bit of a reading on Switzerland and Swiss culture, is cultural, traditional. There, every citizen, every Swiss citizen, every able-bodied man and woman is responsible to take part in military with their military service duties. And when they go home, they are free to take their weapons with them. And because of Swiss tradition and Swiss history, it is decided that it is the best option to keep every citizen soldier to keep their arms easily accessible in their homes. And in case of a need for kind of mobilization, then they can easily access, and they're trained, and they can easily join the ranks for any kind of military mobilization. So that is kind of, very roughly speaking, at a high level, the reason why behind this Swiss tradition. And gun culture has quite a bit of weight in Swiss life. I mean, they have a lot of social events, gun events, shooting competitions, and they're doing this very frequently. It is really, part of life, part of the culture, part of social life. And there is no stigma, absolutely no stigma, like there is in the United States. Nobody is talking about, outlawing guns, confiscating guns. Nobody is saying, I'm going to come and take your guns, or bring in a lot of restrictions, or talking about bringing a lot of restrictions to gun ownership. So my other question is, that's one part of my question. The question is we really have to take it, if we are really serious about that, I think we have to show due diligence and start a very comprehensive social, psychological, mental health perspective. All those things included comparative research and analyses between those two countries. Try to come up with some kind of conclusion to understand the dynamics that is causing this horrible crime rate, including with firearms in the United States. That's one component of the question. The other component is this. Do you remember? I mean, does any one of you who is watching my video, do you remember, seriously, honestly, have you ever heard of anyone in the United States, when they talk about gun crimes and, gun control, anti-gun, guns kill people and all that blah, blah, blah. Do you remember any one of those people ever bringing the Swiss example? Have you heard about it? I don't remember hearing this. I don't remember hearing this because nobody really mentioned this. I'm talking about those people who are talking about how horrible the guns are, the gun ownership is, and to be able to stop crime, we have to confiscate guns. When they're saying that, they bring examples from Australia, they bring examples from United Kingdom, they bring examples from many parts of the world, but they never mention Switzerland. Now I'm asking this question. Why is it that they never mention that? Because it is something, in my opinion, that question, if people start digging into this, they would find themselves in an incredibly difficult position because they cannot explain that. They know they cannot explain that. And in fact, they know that gun ownership is not at all statistically correlated with crimes, including firearms, crimes with firearms. It is entirely, completely different thing. And when I'm saying again, you know that I don't have to repeat, but I'm going to say it again. When I do say gun ownership, I mean people like myself who own guns legally, buy them from stores, have them registered to my name. Every single gun I have is registered. ATF does know it, which guns I have. I have a carry permit. I'm a law-abiding citizen. When you look at the population of those people who have carry permit, concealed carry permit, within that population, the crime rate with firearms is truly 0%. It is non-existent, 0%. That's the community, like, people with permits, concealed carry permits. Let's expand this population. Among the people who buys their guns from stores, they might have a permit or not, but all the people who buy guns from stores legally and have them registered to their names, the crime rate among those people is not 0%, it's a little higher, but at the negligible levels. Very negligible levels. Like the Swiss example I gave you, it was 0.02%. Probably this percentage is a little higher, but maybe within the neighborhood of maybe 1 or 2%. Not 10%, not 8%, not 5%. Extremely low. So the crimes that are being committed annually, 30 or 35,000 of them, who are those people committing those crimes? You remember I told you so many of them are actually suicides. Actually, almost half, or maybe even a little more than half, a little more than 50% of those deaths are actually suicide. Individuals with handguns, rifles, or any kind of firearm, they decide to take their own life for whatever reason. First off, this is not a gun issue. This is not a gun problem. This is obviously, we're talking about suicide. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about other more completely different, unrelated, and complex issues. Social, psychological, mental health issues. That's almost like the half that population. I mean, out of 30,000, let's say 15,000 killing themselves, taking their own lives. So that leaves another 15,000, let's say, roughly speaking, right? That includes everything. That is included, say a guy, two guys are just storming into a convenience store at night, gunpoint, they're trying to rob, and let's say the person at the register is deciding to resist. He has a gun. There's a gunfight. Somebody gets killed. Or there's a domestic violence. Or there's some argument between two guys. Or maybe there's a kind of a heist situation, robbery, burglary, home invasion situation. All those are combined into this 15,000. It is still a huge number. Very high number. But that is, again, when you look at those people, the people that, especially, the ones going to like a convenience store to rob the store, or, attacking somebody to rob him, things like that. I mean, extremely high percentages, extremely high likelihood that their guns were not legal, not registered to their names. They found those guns, they're stolen guns, they found them on the street, they're illegally owned. There's basically tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of illegally circulating guns on the streets. In one year, in Chicago, Illinois, police collected over 50,000 guns from the streets. Every single one of them was illegal. They were all stolen guns. They were all confiscated from criminals, gang members, and other type of criminals. So, see that when you look at it again, the crimes that we're talking about are committed by those individuals who you would not call, or I would not call, law-abiding citizens. So first off, when they talk about crime, and when they propose that they can reduce the crime by confiscating our guns, they're talking about, proposing a law, right? They're going to say, you're going to bring your gun. You're going to give up your gun. We'll take your gun. What am I going to do as a law-abiding citizen? I'm going to say, okay, this is the law. And if I'm a law-abiding citizen, I don't want to be in an illegal status. I don't want to do anything illegal. I will consider, giving up on my gun or guns. On the other hand, criminal, by default, by definition, criminal is a person who doesn't care about law. He will not do that. Therefore, I will be defenseless. But that's another point of discussion. I'm not discussing about that. That's given. We all know that. I'm not going to get into that. We all know that, and that's given. What I'm trying to say is here why is it, again, that's my emphasis, why is it that gun control lobby, gun control people who are trying to come up with, propose those laws that is making, gun ownership very difficult. And eventually, we all know, eventually they want to confiscate our guns. Why is it that they never bring Swiss example? This question we must ask. We must bring this up into public discussions. We must dig into that, and we must basically almost like, show this question down their throats, to make them think and put them in a position, kind of corner them and ask this question, why is it that you guys never talk about this comparison? Because you know that you're in an extremely difficult position if people start asking this comparison, because you know that you're not going to be able to explain it, because your discussion, your argument, their argument, the gun control lobby's argument is, from the beginning to the end, is baseless. Baseless. And it all try to build their case based upon lies, deception, manipulation, and lies. They bring examples. They do make some, comparisons. You can, here and there you're seeing that. Well, let's look at the situation in United Kingdom. After they made the guns illegal, school shootings of gun crime, gun-related crime, boom, went down. Same thing in Australia. Let me ask you this. In England, yes, they did that. They, outlawed guns altogether, kind of blanket law. You can't have a gun. You cannot have a firearm in the United Kingdom, or it's extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. After that, the crime committed with knives is at, the level of it is incredible. The people getting stabbed in London, this is incredible levels. People are now trying to bring the gun ownership rights to protect themselves. Excuse me. Because they know that they are defenseless. They're defenseless. They need some kind of protection, and they're defenseless. They don't talk about that. They only bring the statistics to create a plausible discussion, to kind of support their arguments, political arguments, to bring complete control on gun ownership, and eventually, and finally, to eliminate it. To get all the guns, to confiscate all the guns from the public. Australia is the same, discussion goes for the Australia. So there are many other examples, actually I can get into it, but again, I'm telling you, the purpose of this recording and my emphasis is not in those areas, because I can delve into a lot of statistics, I can delve into a lot of comparisons, and I can delve into a lot of that kind of arguments to prove the point that, excuse me, I'm sorry, the gun ownership by law-abiding people has absolutely no statistical correlation with crime. Anyone I know And I believe you can say the same thing, obviously. Myself, my father-in-law, who himself and his father and his father-in-law and his grandfather and great-grandparents always had guns. My brother-in-law and his side, same. None of these people in their entire lifetime, we're talking about, if you add all these people, we're talking about hundreds of years of lifetime with guns without a single crime. All these people own guns legally. They were all decent people. There are 100 million people approximately in the United States who own guns. And according to statistics, there are about 438 million guns in the possession of the public, not necessarily in the possession of the military or law enforcement, but public. These are all personal guns. I mean, imagine if everybody was this big population, 100 million people with multiples guns. If there was a serious and true correlation between the gun ownership and crime, today, I guess, we wouldn't be around here. Nobody would be around here. I mean, we'd be all dead or wounded or somehow, I don't know. The life wouldn't be like this. If you think about that, it's actually extremely low in a sense. I know it sounds funny, but when you look at the crime rate, because the crime rate, like I tried to explain before, I try to break it down. The suicide, criminals, illegal guns, this is one segment of the total population, and the rest of the segment, the rest of the population with guns, we're not seeing, we're not hearing any kind of crime. But again, going back to the same question, we have to push these gun control lobby, these people who are trying to bring their convincing and strong arguments and doing everything to confiscate guns. They're doing everything to convince people that guns cause crime. Whereas what I'm trying to say is, what we all know real good, it is not the guns causing the crime. In this case, school shootings we talked about, it is the mental health problem. Another video I was talking about how to protect children in the school system, and I'm not going to talk about that because this is a different topic, and I'm not going to be trying to kind of put that in also in this recording, in this video. But something must be done, and done immediately. That's a fact. Until the problem is kind of figured out and they understand what's going on, if they ever do it. Again, going back to Swiss example. Switzerland, we all know it for that tiny little beautiful country. Actually, it is beautiful. Swiss Alps, beautiful nature, forests. Their famous Swiss chocolate, Swiss Army knives, and their guns. And we must seriously sit down and understand and compare, to make some references, some logical and sound references between the U.S. culture, U.S. social structure, U.S. traditions, U.S. history, and the same things for Switzerland, and compare the Swiss and U.S. cultures from the gun perspective, particularly emphasizing on crime, the violent crime with firearms. I don't remember hearing about this. Why not? Why is it that we're not hearing that? That's the question. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about. Thank you very much for spending time watching and listening to me. Hopefully, we'll see again each other at a different recording. Stay safe.